All right, good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Great. We rarely know how the future is going to play out, right? So let's play a game. I'm going to show you some videos, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to actually yell out what you think is going to happen next in the clip. And the reason why I want you to yell it out is because I don't want you to look around after the fact and be like, oh, I knew that, like a liar. So I want you to actually declare to everyone else what you think is going to happen. All right, so let's roll it. All right, does he make it or miss it? Yell it out. Okay, so we have a miss. Oh! Looks like it was no good. Good job. Now, obviously, this happened 8 years ago, so maybe some of you remember. How about this one right here? We've got a high school track meet. It's going around, and let's see here. What do we think is going to happen next? Yell it out. Okay, let's find out. Oh, a dog has come out of the stands and is now going to, let's see, can it overtake the leader? And, oh, it's going to be close. Oh, did anybody have the dog winning the high school track meet? Maybe a couple of you. It was a real Air Bud moment for us. Okay, here we go. Let's see. What do you think is going to happen next? You're like, it's not going to be good. Oh. And then I had so much fun with animals attacking people. I just strung together a few more so that we could appreciate this before, Oh.
Well, we'll get it.
They seem lovable, but they are not.
Did he knock you over?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Terrifying. Guys, that's like a top 10 fear for me. I'll tell you, it was also a lot harder to find some videos that had audio I could use in church, but that's for another day. We rarely know how the future is going to play out, and so that's why wisdom is so important. Because what is wisdom? It is positioning ourselves for success, not right now, but later. It's one of the reasons why you should have a savings account or an emergency fund, because it's not about right now, it's about the unexpected future. Why do you take out insurance? Because you don't know what is going to happen. What these are wise moves that position us for success, not now, but for an unexpected future. Now, if you ever read through the book of Proverbs, you'll learn that it's actually a collection of really good positioning tactics. Like, you follow these things, it puts you in a position now for the things that you can't foresee later. And for those of you who have ever gone against wisdom, you know that there is a tax for this, right? A couple years back, I used as a sermon illustration one day how around the time my oldest daughter was born, I had just finished reading a book about Elon Musk and Tesla and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, Jen, I think this is like some game-changing technology. What if we took some of our money and we put it into Tesla? And we talked about it, we agreed upon it, my daughter was born, I kind of forgot to do it, and I remember about 2 years ago looking at how much that initial $1,000 would be worth today, and it was like $12,000 to $15,000. And I remember thinking that's terrible. I'm never going to make that mistake again. And so I looked in my closet and I saw I'd bought one of those Oculus Quest, like the VR headset things. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I should invest in that. So I took a lot of money and I put it into Facebook, and then 2 weeks later, the largest market cap hit in the history of the stock market happened to that exact stock, and I lost a lot of money. I kept joking with Jen, it was a 2-for-1 special. I bought one, but now it's worth the price of 2. So it's not very good. And the thing is, when I looked at it, was it wise? No. I didn't do any research. I literally just looked in the closet, and everyone would tell you that is a bad investment strategy. So what I'm saying is there is a tax for going against wisdom. You do the right things the right way, and it usually leads to good things later. You do the wrong things the wrong way, and it typically sets you up for failure. So, one of the challenges that we have is there are a lot of things in this world that they look like they're wise, but they're foolishness in disguise. So I'll call them a foolishness trap. Like, I'll give you an example. As we all know, if you're walking and you get stuck in quicksand, what you want to do is you want to flow yourself around because when you're stuck in water, you tread water and get out. And as I've been told, when it comes to quicksand, you just want to be as still as possible, and that gives somebody else the opportunity to pull you out. Obviously, a problem we deal with all the time. For those of you who learn to drive in cold weather environments, if you're driving and you hit a patch of ice, it feels wise to ram your foot into the brake, right? Because you're moving at a speed you don't want to, so it's put the brake on and that way you can slow down, except that's actually foolishness, right? You want to turn with whatever direction you're going. It feels wise, but it's not. There are other things where sometimes, let's just say hypothetically, your wife is pregnant and it feels wise to celebrate with her all of your fitness goals that you're hitting and all the weight loss that you've hit. But I'm telling you right now, it's foolishness in disguise. All right, let's take one that, this isn't me trying to get on a moral high horse or anything, but let's take moving in together before marriage, okay? It feels wise. And I get it, especially it's if you didn't have people in your life saying, "Oh, don't do that." It feels wise, right? Because how are you going to get to know what the other person is like? How are you going to know if there's those weird pet peeves that you would have never known? What if they load the dishwasher wrong? It's you got to find out some of these things before you actually commit. But listen to this. According to a 2018 study by Stanford professors Michael Rosenfeld and Katharina Ressler, this is, and I quote, "There are benefits in the short term, but a long-term cost and stability." What they discovered is that more often than not, couples that moved in together before they actually got married ended up in divorce more often than those who waited until after they were married. And what I'm saying is it looks wise. It checks almost all the boxes, but the research is kind of showing hey, that's not necessarily the best thing. And so for me as a pastor, what I want to do is I want to help you pick the right decisions, make the wise choices, but also to avoid the foolishness traps that you might so easily fall into. So last week we started a brand new series through the book of Ruth, and I want to give you some wisdom that we can see from these women in the Bible. And the book of Ruth is kind of an odd book within the collection of books that we have in the Bible, because it feels a little out of place. See, most of the Old Testament is either a collection of law, so it's do these things, don't do these things, or it's prophecy, meaning you have people who are speaking on behalf of God, usually to say, change your ways or disaster is going to strike. Or you have wisdom books, kind of like we were talking about a minute ago, like the book of Proverbs and Psalms and all those. Or you have the history of incredibly important leaders in Jewish history. But then, in the middle of all of these books, you have these 4 short chapters called the book of Ruth. And the story opens with a woman by the name of Naomi, who is married to a guy from Bethlehem, the same one from the Christmas story, named Elimelech. And they also have 2 sons. But then a famine hits. And they say, we need to get out of here and need to go to a place that has more plentiful food. So they uproot everything and they move to a foreign land, is what it says. And where they actually move is a country called Moab. Now, Moab and Israel, they're not always on great terms, especially at this stage in world history. So they're not, imagine us in the Soviet Union, that type of relationship. Maybe the United States with Iran, just that type of animosity towards each other, and they didn't always mesh well. But Elimelech and Naomi said, it's important for us to feed our children, so we're going to pack up and we're going to move 100 miles away to this foreign land. And while they're there as outsiders and people who are probably derided a little bit by the rest of society, Elimelech dies. So now Naomi is a widow. But it's okay because her sons marry two Moabite women, and as long as her sons have children, there's like a safety net because they're going to be able to provide where her husband could no longer do so. But then the unthinkable happens. Her sons die, and they don't have any heirs, no children at all. So guess who is now responsible for these two other women, her daughter-in-laws? Naomi is. And here's the very first foolishness trap I want you to avoid. When so many things go wrong, just give up. It feels wise, right? Like you're going through problems and it just feels like nothing is working out. So just quit. Just get out of it as fast as you can. And I just want to acknowledge there are some things that you probably should quit if given the opportunity. You know, there's this whole term called the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that, wow, we've already put so much money into this project and it probably just needs a little bit more. Well, the sunk cost fallacy is don't just keep putting bad money into bad investments. Like sometimes you should get away with it. That might be a habit that you do that is unhealthy for you and will not lead to your thriving. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship. And I just want to tell you, get out of it. Get to safety fast. Like, I just want to acknowledge there are some times in some places where it probably is wise to say, let's get out of these things. But there are other parts of life where it is foolish to just quit and give up. For example, marriage. It usually never works well to try and quit a marriage. Paying your taxes. Don't just stop even though you don't like where the money's going. Hope, relationships, your relationship with God, even life itself. Is there can sometimes be this temptation to believe it would be so much better if I could just get out of this. It feels wise, but it's a foolishness trap in disguise. So, within the story of Ruth, Naomi reaches a point where she says, I've heard that the famine is over, and I want to go home. Now, is that giving up? I don't think that that's giving up, but here is where the story goes. As she starts heading back to Judea, who is tagging along? Her dead sons' wives. And so she looks at them and she insists, you should go home. Don't stay here. Go back. And out of the two, a woman by the name of Orpah, one of her daughter-in-laws, turns around and leaves. And Ruth insists, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going with you. And Naomi tries talking her out of it. And honestly, it feels very similar. I don't know if you guys remember this 80s movie, Harry and the Hendersons, where John Lithgow finds this woodland ape, a.k.a. Bigfoot, and befriends him until the government wants to come and take him away. And he has to be like, get out of here, go, but only because he loves him. You guys know what I'm talking about? All right, let me cue this up just so we can remind ourselves what it is. It's got a little bit of this vibe. Right? Like, you guys feel like you just witnessed the book of Ruth, right? Like, that's what it feels like. Naomi's like, get out of here. And Ruth's like, no, I'm not leaving. In fact, Ruth gives this big impassioned speech how she can't possibly leave Naomi. And Naomi just stops talking because she realizes, I'm not going to convince you to do anything else. And so it becomes a little bit of a buddy story. Well, sort of. In fact, this is how it says, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. And I think if you read between the lines and you start adding some things up and you consider that Naomi's hope of getting out of the situation that she's in is children from her own family, meaning Ruth and Orpah would need to give birth to children for her to have that safety net again. The fact that she's trying to force them away, probably at a point in life where she was unable to have more children herself, I think it's suggesting that she wanted to quit. I know, what is she quitting? I don't know. Does that mean that she was going to get back to Israel and take her life? I don't think that that's there, but maybe, just maybe, in her mind, she was thinking, all I can do left in life is just live out the rest of my days begging from people and trying to take advantage of the charity around me. And what is implied here is that the hope that there could be a brighter tomorrow, the hope that future could still work out in her favor, was gone. And she's saying, I just need to give up and send them away. It says in verse 19 of Ruth chapter 1, so the two of them continued on their journey, and when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The woman asked. Don't call me Naomi, she responded. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? Just remind you, she says, I went away full. She left in the middle of a famine. She did not leave full. She left under the circumstances of a great emergency. And one of the symptoms of giving up, when you fall into that foolishness trap of just saying, don't go any further, just quit where you're at, is that oftentimes you romanticize the past and you try and paint it in terms where it was so much better before, but really it wasn't. It wasn't that much better before. And what she ends up saying is, why is God so mean to me? Or the subtext, why does God hate me? But let's acknowledge for a second, because remember, it's a foolishness trap. So it looks wise, but it's really foolishness in disguise. In all fairness to Naomi, nothing right has happened in her life so far. And there's not a guarantee that things will demonstrably get better. But I love the lyrics of the song, My Testimony by Elevation Worship, because in it says, if I'm not dead, then you're not done. Meaning, as long as I'm still pulling breath, God has something in store for me. Don't quit while there's still time on the clock. Don't just quit the movie before you get to the second act. In fact, I'll put in this, when you're going through hell, don't just set up camp. That's the worst place to do it. Right? Keep moving. There's a lot of reasons to think that Naomi was finished. She's older in life, nothing has worked out so far. And maybe you relate to that. But what if you're in chapter 1 of a 4-part epic and you just don't see what's happening next? 1,500 years later, Jesus' half-brother James writes to the Christians around the world, especially to the church in Jerusalem, when he writes, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. You're not enduring testing and temptation if you can see, it's clearly going to be better on the other side of this hill. No, you endure testing and temptation when nothing is going right. And this is what he says, because afterward they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. What I'm saying is, keep on going until God is done with what he's doing. Keep moving. All right, chapter 2 of Ruth, verse 1 says, Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, such a great name, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. By the way, this is called foreshadowing. Here's what's going to happen, is that we're going to learn really quick how charity worked within the Old Testament. So what would happen is the farmers, as they would plant their fields, as they would go out for harvest and start pulling in what they would grow, what they would do is they would allow the needy members of their community to walk behind them and pick up what was missed. And so in verse 2 of chapter 2, it says, One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. So she's not saying, let me go get a job. What she's saying is, I'm going to go take advantage of the charity of a local farmer. And Naomi replied, All right, my daughter, go ahead. Just as a quick time out, going back to the whole thing of just quitting in the middle of things. I love that Ruth's I'm with you to the end, Naomi. Let's keep going together. And when they get there, Ruth's well, we got to eat, so I'm going to go get some food. And Naomi's only response is, You should go, my daughter. And I just want to be if I'm Ruth, I'm asking, Naomi, what are you doing today? What's your plan? Are you just going to hang out at home? And for those who are well, she's older. She just walked 100 miles from I think she's in pretty good shape. And we don't know what Ruth is thinking in this moment. She is the Moabite who has left her home to move to Judea. She is now the outsider that is derided by everybody else. Her husband has died, and her mother-in-law told her, get out of here, nobody wants you, and she stuck with her. And now that they're back in Bethlehem, she's not just her mother-in-law, she's her roommate. I don't know, maybe you have had some pretty awful roommates in the past, but have you ever had a roommate that's like, don't even call me by my name anymore, you call me bitter, because I'm so upset with how my life is going. And then at the point where like, well, are we going to eat today? She's like, yeah, do you mind grabbing some food for me too? Like, this is not a good roommate situation. And I bet there was a temptation for Ruth to rethink the commitment that she had made to her mother-in-law. It's not too late to say, I'm young, I'm not from here, maybe I made a mistake, let me pack my bags and go back to Moab. But I think Ruth avoided a foolishness trap that many of us often fall into, and that is commitments are optional. And I'm not talking about like a light, like, yeah, maybe I can make it. I'm talking about like, hey, I've committed to doing this. And once again, I want to acknowledge there are times when you should renegotiate things that you've committed to, but before you quit, exhaust every other option. In fact, here's what Jesus said about commitments. He says, just say a simple yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. As followers of Jesus, if we take this seriously, I want to challenge you to be one of the most committed when it comes to the things that you said, I will do this. That our follow-through should be great. We should communicate well. One of the things that the Apostle Paul writes to us about what love looks like and the way that we're supposed to love other people is love is patient and it endures all things. Over time, your motivation is going to wane. You ever go to the gym in February? It looks a little different than it did 4 weeks before, right? Because our motivation, it starts to deplete. It starts to go away. And I want to challenge you, let your commitment pick up where your motivation drops off. See, when you want to quit, but you keep going, that is what will make you special in this world. And Ruth keeps going within this story without any promise that things are going to get better. And she has options in life. She's probably 25 to 30 years old. In the next chapter, she's going to basically go to Boaz, and like I hate to be the spoiler, but she's going to go to Boaz and say, hey, what do you think about marriage? And he's like super excited about the options, which makes me think Ruth is not an uggo, all right? Like that's what I'm reading here, is that she's probably not like a super ugly girl, that this is something that Boaz is excited about. Maybe Boaz is like super ugly, I don't know, but like what I'm trying to say is Ruth probably had other options in life, but she let her commitment pick up where maybe her motivation was dropping off. It had to be hard to be her, but she kept going even when it got hard. See, commitment is doing what you said you were going to do, even when the mood that you set it in is long gone. Let your commitment pick up where your motivation drops off. Strong commitments always precede great actions. You look at anybody who's accomplished anything of note in this world, and what you will usually find is that there was a commitment that stayed steadfast even during the losing season. You know, everybody can be motivated when you're undefeated and you're going into the final stretch looking towards the playoffs. It's hard to be motivated when you just had a 5-12 season and everybody's picking you to finish last the next year, right? But as we've seen over and over and over again, the great athletes, the great leaders, the people who do great things in this world, they allow their commitments to precede their great actions. And one of the things, let me talk to my fellow millennials and my fellow Gen Z in the room. One of the problems with our generation is we have a pretty low pain tolerance. When things start to get a little hard, we're like, maybe I can get out of this. Maybe I can just quit. And I just want to say, we should build up our pain tolerance because everything of value and worth usually requires a little bit of hard work and a little bit of pain. And you're going to want to quit. And the foolishness trap is to say, things are hard, I should just quit. I should treat this commitment as optional, but let your commitment pick up where your motivation drops off. All right, verse 3 of chapter 2 says, "So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened," you can circle, highlight, underline, we're going to come back to that in a minute, "she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father Elimelech." Like I said, more on the as it happened a little bit later. She goes in this field and she has no idea the connection that she has to Boaz, the person who owns the field. And as she's out there walking behind the workers, Boaz comes and sees what's happening. And he notices Ruth working, and he starts to ask, like, who is this young woman? He finds out it's Naomi's daughter-in-law, and it says in verse 8, "Boaz went over and said to Ruth, 'Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they're harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water that they have drawn from the well.'" I hate to just point out the obvious here, but everything that Ruth takes home that day is something that Boaz does not get to take home for his harvest. Right? Like, he gets zero of everything that she gathers. Everything that she takes is completely out of his generosity, which falls into the next foolishness trap. The foolishness trap of, I need to maximize 100% of all I have. And the way this plays out in our life is I am stretched to every dollar in my budget, that nothing else can come in because I've spent it all. Or I'm stretched to every second of my day. Or I'm stretched to every ounce of energy that I possess. And why do we do this? Because frankly, it feels wise to redeem all that we've been gifted with. Like, it would make the most business sense for Boaz to reward his workers for their thoroughness as they go through the fields, right? Like, I bought this seed, I planted it, now it's my responsibility to gather as much of it as I possibly can. But what he's saying instead is leave just a little bit for the widow. Don't take it all. Leave some of it for her. And this isn't something that was unique to Boaz of like, hey, let's give him a golf clap because like, what a great dude. Like, this is something that God actually asked all of the Israelites to do in the law. He's like, leave some of the stalks for the poor in your village to pick up. But that's not specific. So Boaz could have said, you know what, I'm going to leave just a little bit less. He could have spiritualized even, leaving none. He could have been like, you know what, I can make a better sacrifice to God if I just take in a little bit more. I can be more effective and thorough in my worship. But here is the truth. The foolishness trap is I need to maximize 100% of all I have. But here's reality. Generosity is born in the margins. You can't be generous with what you don't have. You know, here's the thing, is like, I can almost guarantee that if I talk to every one of you and we had like one-on-one interviews, and just let me preface this by saying this has nothing to do with money given to the church. I'm talking about your time and your energy and even your resources that you give to other things, other people. I can guarantee that almost every one of us would say, if I could, I would like to give more. I would like to do more. I'd like to be more generous towards the people I love. I'd love to be more generous towards these charities. I'd love to be more generous. But the reality is, I can't. And the reason why you can't is because you have no extra. In our day and age, one of the things we all struggle with is I need more. And we say mine is 100% mine all the time. And this is especially true in today's day and age. And I just want you to wrestle with this thought. If you're too busy with what God has prompted you to do, then you're too busy. Because God has given you just enough time to do exactly what He's called you to do. And it's so funny because it's a badge of honor for us when you say, how you doing? Oh, I'm busy. Right? Like we say that as if like, you should be a little proud of me because I have maximized all of my time. But as a finite resource, it's something you cannot just recoup. How many of you would ever brag to somebody that said, hey, how are you doing financially? Oh, I have spent all of my money. It is 100% gone. I can't tell you everything that I've spent my money on, right? Like, we'd never say, oh, wow, I'm so proud of you, man. That's great. But we do that with our time. Generosity is born in the margins. You cannot be generous with what you don't have. If you don't have any extra time, energy, or money, you will never find yourself in a position to help those who are in need. And the other side of this is, generosity will make you happier. Generosity will add more value into your life. Generosity will help you establish a legacy that will outlive who you are today. And if you can't be generous, then you have to evaluate, what do I need to cut back on so that I can leave something in the margins? What I'm saying is don't budget 100% of your income for you. I'm saying don't schedule yourself into a corner. Don't be so fixated on your goals and the things that you want to do that everyone and everything else gets edged out in your life. The foolishness trap is, I need to maximize everything that I've been given. But the truth is, God's called you to be generous, and generosity is born in the margins. So Boaz, he continues in his generosity towards Ruth, and actually, he invites her to eat with his workers. So he's not treating her like, a charity case. He's bringing her onto the team. And it says in verse 15 of chapter 2, when Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and actually pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up and don't give her a hard time. And it actually says that Ruth gathers a full basket for her and Naomi. This was 2 weeks worth of barley. Unheard of. It does not happen, especially in charity. And of course, Ruth gets it back home, and Naomi is taken aback by it. Everything in her life has been going wrong, and then out of the blue, there's a little glimmer of hope beginning to show. And it says in verse 20 of chapter 2, Naomi speaking, may the Lord bless him. He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is actually one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. Boaz as the family redeemer is actually what this whole book is about, and we'll spend a lot more time the next 2 weeks diving into that concept. But I want to go back to that foolishness trap we talked about at the very beginning that Naomi was falling into, of just wanting to give up because she thought God had given up on her. For those of you who've been attending for more than 2 weeks, you know that we just wrapped up our study through the book of Daniel, and the second half of Daniel has some kind of odd things, right? Like you see a bunch of angels, you see a lot of predictions about the future, and Ruth is like the exact opposite. There's no angels, there's no prophets in the story. In fact, there's no overt miracles, or you don't ever hear the voice of God speaking, clarifying things. But what there is, and I had you circle, underline, and highlight it, is this little phrase, as it happened. Ruth started working in Boaz's field. And Bethlehem's not huge, I'll give it that. It's not this giant metropolis. So it's not crazy that she would have happened into that field. But those 3 words, as it happened, that's often the breadcrumbs of some of God's biggest moves in our lives. It's not the giant miracle. It's not the parting of the Red Sea. It's not, man, I only had $10 and God multiplied it and suddenly I had $5,000. It's not always that. It's more often than not the as it happened moments. And if you're not looking for it and you're not aware of it, you're going to write it off oh, it's coincidence, it's nothing big deal. But the reality is that God did it on purpose, as it happened. Naomi wanted to give up because she thought God had given up on her, but really, she just couldn't see what he was doing. Within this story, Ruth was wise. She needed help, and she went to work. God blessed her because she was positioned well. She stuck to her commitments even when the motivation probably had dropped off. Boaz, he was also wise. He could have been selfish. He could have kept everything for himself. But instead, he allows generosity to be birthed in the margins of his life. And on the other side of it, as he's going to find out in the few days and months and weeks later, God is going to do so much more through this little act of generosity than he could have ever imagined, only because he'd positioned himself to when the opportunity came, Ruth could take advantage of it. And I'm actually arguing that maybe she wasn't foolish in everything that she did, but there was a lot of moments where Naomi just was not wise in this story. She tries pushing away the people that could ultimately help her. She changes her identity to bitter. She stays home while Ruth does all of the work. But I don't want you to miss this. The story of Ruth is not just about the story of Ruth. Ruth is going to be redeemed by Boaz in the next couple weeks. But it's also the story of how God redeems Naomi. And God's grace is so strong in our lives that even our own foolishness, the times when we do the wrong thing, even when we know it's the wrong thing, but when we do the wrong thing, God's grace is so strong it cannot prevent God from still working in our lives. Jesus did not die for you because you were such a good person and you were so worthy of it. He dies in spite of the fact that you're not. You do dumb things all the time. If people could listen to your thoughts, I don't think you would be that lovely of a person. But God's still like, you know what? I love this person so much. My grace is going to extend to them, even though they don't always deserve this. And I also believe that wisdom is more precious than diamonds, and utilizing it can make your life better, but it's no match for the grace that God can show you in this life. A grace that He wants to offer you right now. So if you hear nothing else, you should do the wise thing. It's the right thing to do. It positions you for the future, all that. But God's saying, I have something even better for you than just wisdom and making the right decision. I want to offer you grace. That when you didn't deserve it, I died for you. I brought you back into a relationship with me. And as we will explore really the beauty and the depths of later, I want to redeem you into a relationship with me. So I want to invite you guys to pray with me as we examine what this means for us. So God, you are a God of redemption. You are a God of grace. You are a God that somehow fixes our foolishness even when we don't deserve it. God, I'm praying that we would find ourselves with the kind of wisdom that Ruth and Boaz showed, where they didn't fall into the foolishness traps, but God, that they did the right thing the right way, even though there was ample reasons not to. And God, I'm praying that we would avoid being like Naomi to try and give up and just declare that everything is hopeless and hopeless for the rest of our lives. But God, I'm praying more than anything that we would receive the grace that you're offering to us. That God, that you would grant us more than what we deserve, a better future than what we could ever hope for. God, I'm praying that we would be sensitive to where your Holy Spirit is leading us and that we would see, oh, as it happened, you lined me up for this moment at this time and this place for this reason. But God, that we wouldn't get sidetracked by our own foolishness, but God, we would say, I want to pursue you with everything that I've got. And God, I'm praying that the grace that you're offering us would override any of the dumb decisions that we make, any of the bad moves that we make, that God, you would be speaking clearly and thoroughly to us. I have a purpose and a plan for your life, that I have called you into something better. And that God, I'm praying for those in this room who have never said, God, I'm asking you to be the Savior of my life, to be the Lord, the one who's guiding me and leading me. That God, you would put this prayer on their lips of, God, I want your grace. So I'm asking you, forgive me of my dumb decisions, forgive me of my sin, forgive me of my mistakes. God, see past that. Forgive me of it. That I believe that you took it on the cross so that I wouldn't have to deal with it myself. And so, God, I'm asking that you would forgive me and take full control of my life. And I pray this all in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.